Imagine living in an entirely new place where everything is different from what you're used to, where you don't know how to farm the land, you don't know how to forage in this area, and you might not know how to prepare the foods that are available. The story of what we call the first Thanksgiving in 1621 is a tragic but also a hopeful one. The Pilgrims had just suffered a horrific first year in America, with half of their community passing away. And the Wampanoag native people, their allies, had suffered a terrible plague that killed many of their people. Together, this tribe and the Pilgrims celebrated a 3-day feast of Thanksgiving after a bountiful harvest in 1621. I wanted to try making some of the things that they may have actually eaten during this feast. The foods that were available in this time were native or cultivated traditionally by Native Americans. So the foods are mostly very different from what we might see at a Thanksgiving dinner today. First, we are going to do our best to prepare squash in a way that they may have in 1621. This food is a very important part of the diet of the Pilgrims and Native Americans in this time. Squash is one of the crops in the Native American Three Sisters method of farming that the Wampanoag Native Americans taught to the Pilgrims. The Three Sisters method of farming includes corn, beans, and squash. Today, I'm using a combination of pumpkin, acorn squash, and butternut squash. I'm actually saving the seeds from the pumpkin to make a garnish with. Then I'm peeling all of my squash. With those seeds, we are going to rinse well, and we're going to put in a seawater solution. This is a method that many Native Americans used throughout history to make the seeds more digestible by breaking down enzymes. We're combining a little less than 20 grams of sea salt with around 480 grams of filtered water, and then we're just going to let those soak. With our squash, we are making a traditional recipe from the New England territory that was served for many years. It's called stewed pompions. This was what large squash or pumpkins were called in this time period. This traditional New England dish later included cider vinegar and spices like ginger. In 1621, however, I don't think they would have had access to apple cider vinegar because the only apples growing natively were crab apples, and I don't think they would have had any foreign spices either. So we are simply adding our diced winter squash to a large pot, adding a small amount of water and bringing it to a simmer, then reducing that heat to low, covering with a bit of space for some steam to escape, and letting that cook on low all day. That is how they traditionally made this over a fire in a large pot. Make sure to occasionally check it and add some water if it starts to stick. Next, we're preparing a dish that would have highly likely been eaten at this feast, and that is duck. You can see how fatty duck is, so we will have to prepare this a little differently from other birds that you might be used to preparing. It's mentioned in historical records that wildfowl were brought for the feast, and a highly likely type of bird would be a waterfowl based on the season of this celebration. We're going to imitate cooking this bird over a fire by grilling it. So first I'm butterflying the bird, and I'm also cutting off extra fat that's just going to burn off. I can save this fat and render it down to use for cooking later. I'm also removing the neck because I think it'll just dry out, and I can use that later in a soup. So it's up to you if you want to leave the neck on or not. The next step for grilling duck is poking lots of holes. This is very important because the skin of duck with the fat layer is so thick that we need to make sure we poke enough holes for that fat to be released so the meat can cook properly. Try not to puncture the meat too much and only to puncture the fat and skin. Next, I'm salting both sides and rubbing the salt in just a bit. It is mentioned that venison was served at this feast, and there may have also been seafood like lobster and mussels at this feast, as well as maybe even some eel. When you're ready to grill this duck, make sure to cook it at an indirect heat with a drip pan under it. Otherwise, it'll get really smoky from the fat and just taste burned. I grilled this duck for about 3 hours at temperatures between 350 and 375 degrees until the internal temperature was 165 degrees Fahrenheit. I flipped it about halfway through to get the skin side nicely browned and crispy. Some of the foods that may have been available growing natively would be cranberries and maybe even maple syrup. Native Americans knew how to tap maple trees for a long time, so it's likely that that might have been available. I found it interesting that honeybees are actually not native to the United States and were not brought over yet, so they would not have had access to honey. For this recipe, I combined 6 ounces of fresh cranberries with 1/3 cup of water, a dash of salt, and 1/4 cup of maple syrup. Then I simmered it until it reached a texture that I liked. The next dish we're making includes a very important crop for the people of this time, and that is with corn. We are making a corn porridge, which would have been a very common dish during this time. The Native Americans called this dish Nasaump and ate it with seeds, nuts, and berries. And later the Pilgrims called this Saump and ate it with milk. However, I don't think there would have been much, if any, milk because there were no cows, and on the Mayflower, there may have only been a couple of goats, if any. I'm combining 4 cups of water with 1 cup of masa harina and a dash of salt. I used masa harina because the corn is first soaked in lime, which enables the digestibility of many of the nutrients in the corn. This is how many Native American people used to prepare corn. Next, we are preparing the garnish for our porridge with our pumpkin seeds. After they have been soaking in the seawater solution for a few hours, dry them thoroughly with a towel. Make sure to dry them out as much as you can because it'll be hard to roast them if they're too wet. Then spread them out onto a baking dish. Then add some salt and spread evenly. After salting, add a bit of fat like tallow, or I used the fat coming from the duck in the drip pan. I recommend cooking with animal fat instead of with seed oils, even though we are eating these seeds. It's a very small amount of seeds, and seed oils are very highly processed and cause oxidative stress to the body. I roasted these at 325 for about 15 minutes or until golden. The duck has now reached an internal temperature of 165 degrees, and everything else is ready to eat. I'm topping my stewed pompions with the cranberries and my nasaump with the roasted pumpkin seeds, and enjoying with my duck. I hope you enjoyed this video about some of the dishes that may have been served at that feast in 1621. Comment below if you have more ideas of what may have been served at that feast. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy content about natural and nourished traditional living, feel free to subscribe to my channel.